Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of I talk about a lot of movies in a short amount of time for no reason at all. This is actually the first episode of this new series that will probably not be a series. A couple weeks ago I made a video with my friends and hoped that maybe some of their subscribers would come my way, so thanks to the single person who has subscribed to my channel since the last video. I don't know who you are, but you're probably very cool, so thank you for that. Anyway, getting right into this video. Yeah, I don't know how to do any sort of intro. I watched a bunch of horror movies in September and October this year for spooky season. To be specific, I think I watched like 40 different movies if you count short films and miniseries and stuff, so I'm going to very briefly talk about all of them. It wasn't technically a marathon because it was across 2 different months, though there were some days that I watched 2, some I didn't watch any. Quick honorable mention to 2 shows that I also watched these past couple months, specifically Death Note and Over the Garden Wall, both of which I watched with my brother. They're 2 of my favorite shows, so I had to watch them this month. They've been mentioned honorably. That was a good intro, I'm just gonna go with that. I started off this binge with House of a Thousand Corpses. The name implies it would be a lot more violent than it is. It's mostly just really disturbing, but also very loud and obnoxious, so I got a headache after watching it, even though I was drinking water. So it wasn't a dehydration headache, it was just a frustration headache. It's not terrible, but it's really not my thing at all. It's way too loud and filled with crazy visuals that aren't interesting to me, so I didn't care about it. After that I watched Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, or Frankenstein. This isn't really a horror movie, but it's inspired by Frankenstein, the character, the book, the movie, all of it, so I'm counting it, it doesn't matter. This movie is really, really hilarious. Honestly, the whole way through, I would say it's one of the funniest movies I've seen. It's a very funny movie, but also just a really well-made one, so I enjoyed that a lot as well. After that, I watched Parasite. No, not this one. I wish it was that one. No, it was a crappy 80s sci-fi horror movie with the same name. I literally don't remember anything that happened in it, so I'm just gonna move on. After that, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, released on Netflix, and I watched it twice in the same day. It's by one of my favorite directors and writers, Charlie Kaufman. I expected I would like it, and I read the book earlier this year to prepare for it, actually, which I don't do very often. The first time through, I wasn't really sure how I felt about it, but the second time I realized that I really love it, so yeah. It's not technically a horror movie, but it counts enough for me to say I want to mention it anyway. And it's one of my favorite movies of this year, so yeah. Next I watched a movie called Blood Diner, the first of many insane 80s horror movies that I watched this year. And I will talk about this one in a different video later this year. Just suffice it to say, this movie is absolutely insane, so yeah. Following that I watched Insidious, which I found very boring and way too filled with jump scares to have any actual interesting scares or any good atmosphere, and I barely remember anything that happened in it. Not like terrible, but it's also not good. After that I watched a French psychological thriller whose name I will not try to pronounce, so Google Translate.
Diabolique.
Yeah, that. I don't know if you heard that, but yeah. I watched that movie earlier this year, and I absolutely love it. It's a really slow burn psychological thriller that's not really clear about exactly what's going on until the end. I will not spoil it because this is one you should absolutely watch for yourself, knowing basically nothing. It has one of my favorite endings in any horror movie. It's so good that even the movie itself tells you not to spoil it for your friends. You should watch it. It's really good. And after a train of mostly darker movies just in a row, I watched a more light movie, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. This is a horror comedy that I watched because Alan Tudyk is in it. I ended up actually liking Tyler Labine, the other main actor. I liked his character a lot more, actually. I actually found this one to have some similarities to House of a Thousand Corpses, but it wasn't as loud or as annoying. It was actually very well written, really funny, well thought out movie with very likable characters. It has some issues in there, but overall I thought it was a whole lot of fun. Definitely one of the better horror comedies I've seen. So after that, I had a few days break from horror movies because I was getting tired, and then I came back with a movie called Braindead. This came out in 1992 and was directed by Peter Jackson. It's one of his earlier movies. So going into that movie, I didn't really know what it would be. It's the most brutal and violent movie I have ever seen, not even a competition. It is insane. I don't know how they were able to get away with all that in there in the 90s. You can barely get away with that now. Aside from being absolutely disgusting and not really letting up at all for the entire movie, I kinda enjoyed it as well. It has some fun set pieces. The last like 30 minutes are all set in the same party. I don't know if I will ever watch it again though, because it is very hard to watch. Then I watched Children of the Corn. Hot take, I actually liked it. I can accept that it's not like a great movie or anything. The ending kind of sucked. A lot of the acting was pretty bad, aside from the main villain kid who was actually played by a 25-year-old? I could be wrong. I just found the whole story and setting of the movie to be very interesting. I just thought it was entertaining. I don't know if I would say well made, because everyone hates this movie, but I didn't. I enjoyed it, unironically. So yeah, in case you didn't know, my taste in film is trash. So yeah, don't watch this movie if you don't want to. Speaking of my trash movie taste, after that I watched Hellraiser and didn't like it. It's another one where it's just not my kind of horror movie. I didn't care about the story, I didn't care about the characters, the villains were kinda cool. It was enjoyable while I was watching it, but I don't really care about it anymore. Following that, I watched a movie called Trick or Treat, that's spelled with an R and no O. It's just Trick or Treat. This is a Halloween anthology movie that follows a bunch of different characters in the same town celebrating Halloween. And I really loved this one. It was really dark and kind of brutal, but also had a really fun vibe to it because it just feels like a Halloween movie. It was a really good atmosphere as well, and I had just a whole lot of fun watching it, and I would absolutely watch this one again next year. And then, going back into the not horror category, I watched Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. It's Scooby-Doo. It's really what you would expect for the most part until the last 30 minutes or so, because after that it gets a lot more interesting and crazy, and Fred literally decapitates a zombie, so I can't hate this movie. It does a lot that was interesting, even though it's just Scooby-Doo. Yeah, I enjoyed it, so who cares? After that I watched a movie called Cooties with my friends. It's a zombie comedy movie that has Elijah Wood and Lane Wilson and Allison Pill and other actors that are actually good in other movies. This was a movie that just focused way too much on trying to be funny, but the humor is really, really bad. But the ending of this movie was surprisingly amazing. All of my friends and me, when we were watching it, we were just amazed that that ending was attached to a movie this terrible. But I will never watch it again because it is trash. Then I watched the original The Invisible Man from the 30s. This one was also a whole lot of fun. It had a really goofy and kind of chaotic energy to it that I wasn't expecting, but was very welcomed. The Invisible Man character in this movie was very entertaining. He had a lot of really great antics and moments in this entire thing, like when he steals someone's bicycle. The visual effects in this movie are also surprisingly really good, except for a couple of scenes where they weren't as well done. But yeah, honestly, it's a good movie that I was very pleasantly surprised with. After that, I watched the original miniseries version of It from 1990. I don't know what it is about this story that's so appealing to so many people, but I just found this movie and the other two movies, which I'll get to later, very boring and uninteresting and repetitive and predictable. Pennywise is not a good villain, even though Tim Curry in this specific movie is very, very entertaining. I probably liked this one better than both of the remakes, actually, because it didn't feel as a visual effects showcase with a movie kind of attached to it. It's still not good, in my opinion, but it was fine in some parts. After that, I watched another movie with my friends. This one was actually my choice. It's called Deadcon. Imagine it's VidCon, but there's ghosts, and also it's one of the worst movies you've ever seen. It was really fun to make fun of with friends. There's a scene where someone's neck is broken by a balloon, like a party balloon, of the type that should not be able to hurt anyone. So it has some sort of ironic enjoyment to it, but it is bad. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen, so I regretted that choice, obviously. Then I watched Poltergeist for the first time. I hadn't seen it before. I almost watched it last year, but then I didn't for reasons I don't remember. This movie starts off way too slow and takes a good, hour to become really interesting. The third act of this movie is awesome and way better than it has any reason to be. The stuff with the graveyard and the set pieces, even the visual effects actually, are really good, and I thought that aspect of the movie made it a lot more memorable than it otherwise would have been, because it's not that interesting to me. But not bad. Definitely one I would watch again. Only for the third act, though. After that, I watched a movie called It Follows. I'm just gonna basically skip past this one because I don't have a lot to say other than I liked it, but I wouldn't recommend it, so yeah. Then I watched Tim Burton's Frankenweenie, the animated one, not the original short film. This is like the opposite of Poltergeist, where I actually liked the first half of this one a lot better than the second half. Towards the end, it just kind of becomes a way too over-the-top action horror kaiju type movie, like a Godzilla sort of thing. It wasn't that funny to me. I liked the aesthetic of the whole thing. Some of it was good. Also, negative points for the only non-white character in the movie being the villain. Thanks, Tim Burton. Very cool. Then I watched the infamous Plan 9 from Outer Space. This one being known as one of the best bad movies ever made. And it definitely lives up to that title. It's really, really terrible. This was another one I watched with my friends. We made fun of it the whole time. But it was a lot of fun to watch, even though it is bad. There's also some level of unironic enjoyment in it. I don't really know why. It's stupid, but I like it. I don't care. And then after that, I watched the new It movies. Oh my word. Okay, so part 1, it's the exact same movie as the miniseries part 1. It's just a lot more visual effects and bad jump scares and a lot more bad looking blood effects. It's really, really repetitive and predictable. The whole story can be boiled down to someone goes somewhere and then they get jump scared by the clown, repeat for 6 hours because these movies are infinite. Yeah, I didn't like these movies at all. Part 2 was significantly worse. It was way, way, way too long with way too many scenes that could have been cut out. Having not read the book, I don't know why it's so long of a book, since at least in the movies there wasn't really anything that showed me why it's so long. And then I watched Halloween. I think this one's a little bit overrated. I'm not too much into slasher movies at all anyway. It definitely has some enjoyment, but there's a lot that could have been cut and had no real purpose to it. The ending was pretty good, but overall it's not that memorable, and I don't really see why people love it so much now. I understand why they would have when it came out, because there was nothing like it. But at this point, it's just not very, very interesting, and that's it. That's really all there is to say about it. After that, I watched Paranorman, which is the only movie by Laika that I hadn't seen before. Paranorman was fine. It had aspects that I liked, but also the humor in it was really bad for the most part. It was just the kind of super immature, edgy humor that only 12-year-olds find funny. The ending was pretty good though. It had a really nice, unexpected direction to it and really good atmosphere, and honestly, it was just pretty cool. As cheesy as that sounds to say, it was a really cool ending. But I will probably not watch it again because it wasn't that great, but not terrible. Going back onto the train of insane 80s movies, I watched one called Brain Damage. I really don't know how to explain this movie. The main villain in this movie is a disembodied brain creature it's just like a brain on a worm, basically, and he talks and also sings, and he basically mind controls the main character to do killings for him. That's the furthest I can go into this without spoiling anything. But it was surprisingly, actually well made, so that was definitely a pleasant surprise for me. Then I watched Jaws with my friends, and I already made an entire video about that experience, so you should watch it. Then I watched Mandy, which stars Nicolas Cage. This isn't an 80s movie, but it's set in the 80s. This kind of follows the same sort of thing as the insane 80s movies because it's completely crazy, and I don't even know how to describe a single aspect of this movie other than I don't know what it is. I watched this whole movie and then I watched videos about it and read stuff about it. I don't know what this movie's deal is, but also I kind of loved it, and Nicolas Cage was really good in it as well, so I don't know, it was weird. Then I watched John Travolta's The Fanatic. I'll make a full video about that someday, but not right now. It's very bad and very stupid. Then I watched an old Disney package movie called The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad because I thought it was a horror movie because I thought it was based on Sleepy Hollow. As it turns out, the first half of the movie is based on The Wind in the Willows, and the second half is Sleepy Hollow. I don't know what person decided, hey, what if we put those two stories together, because they don't fit together at all. It's not even really horror at all until the last 10 minutes, and that's also the only part of the movie that I liked. It's not terrible, the animation's good, the songs are okay, but it's really forgettable to me, so I will forget about it. I then watched Happy Death Day, which came out a few years ago, I think 2017. This was another one that I was expecting to not really care for. I figured it would be really stupid and boring and dumb, just kind of a really lame movie, basically. But then I actually liked it. There's a lot more going on in this movie than you would think. It has really good characters, and it made this movie a lot more enjoyable than I would have expected. And also, I really like time loop scenarios, so of course I enjoyed this, and I would watch this one again, actually. I watched It Comes at Night. This is a movie I did not care for. I don't really think it counts as a horror movie either, as the only, horror-esque scenes are all dream sequences. At the end of this movie, I didn't really see what the point of the whole thing was. Once it reaches the end, I'm just wondering why anything that happened did and what it's supposed to matter. But it had some parts that were good. It was well made, I guess, but the story was not interesting. Then I watched It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown with my family because it's a Halloween classic that you have to watch every year, or otherwise it's not really Halloween at all. Then after that, I watched a Toy Story short called Toy Story of Terror, which I think was a TV special in 2013. And this I actually really liked. For one, it has a lot of the Toy Story characters that I already really like. The animation was very good for a TV special. It had a lot of classic horror references and homages, which was pretty interesting to me. And also Jessie is the main character, so I liked this one a lot, and it had some good tension for a TV special, especially a really short one. After that, I watched another international movie, this one being called
Das Kabinett des Dr. Caligari.
Yeah. This one is a German silent film from literally 100 years ago, which in and of itself is very interesting to me. But then the movie was also really good. Not usually too into silent movies that aren't comedies because they have a tendency to be really slow, and this was as well, but it had a lot of interesting twists and turns that I wasn't expecting for a 100-year-old silent movie. So definitely a cool classic that I liked a lot. Next I watched Evil Dead 2. Basically Evil Dead 2 is my favorite horror movie. It has lots of really great slapstick as well. This one's basically a full-on comedy, though not really a parody. It has some amazing physical comedy from Bruce Campbell, and his entire performance is amazing. From the dramatic stuff, to the comedic stuff, to the physical stuff especially. I mean, his hand gets possessed, and he has to act as if it's controlling itself separate from him, and has a whole fight scene with it, and that's amazing. I really do love everything about this movie. It's a whole lot of fun, it's really crazy. It's better than the first one as well, by a lot. Then I watched The Exorcist for the first time. I was expecting to not really like this because a lot of my friends had watched it this year as well and said it was not really that interesting, maybe a bit too slow. I would agree that it's a bit too slow and not really scary. But also, this is just a really well-made movie that also happens to be a horror movie. I actually enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to. The characters are very well realized. It's got a really good slow burn to what's actually happening. Then I was running out of ideas for movies to watch because it was coming close to the end of the month, but I didn't want to just stop. So I found a weird Japanese movie called Happiness of the Katakuris. I don't know what people in Japan know that Americans don't that leads them to make such unique movies. Because American movies have just been so stale for like 30 years. Meanwhile in Japan they're making stuff like this. It's basically a bunch of people keep dying in this family's house and they have to cover up the deaths. And also, yeah, this is basically a musical. This was probably my favorite discovery of this year that I hadn't heard of before. This movie also has the best discovering a dead body scene ever in cinema. You can put your contenders for your favorites in the comments, but I guarantee they will not be anything better than what's in this movie. This is another one that I'm going to have to watch again sometime because I just had way too much fun with it. It's barely really a horror movie other than the dark comedy aspects. And I finished off the month with Killer Klowns from Outer Space. I watched this on Halloween because I wanted something a lot more fun and less spooky or horror. And this is going to have to be a Halloween staple for me. I've now seen it 3 times. It's hilarious and really goofy. This basically just encapsulates everything I love about weird 80s horror movies, and even though it's not my favorite, I actually do have some problems with it that keep it from being like S tier in my mind. I still love it even despite those issues, in some cases because of them. The biggest thing that makes this movie so good is that the filmmakers knew how stupid it was, and that's part of what makes me love it so much. Like, you can make a stupid movie, sure, but if you aren't just completely embracing it and having fun with it, then your movie is going to be bad. Killer Clowns from Outer Space is one of my favorites. I will probably watch it every year I'm able to. It's lots of fun, lots of goofy fun, and that's how I ended off the year, and that's how I ended off the month of way too many horror movies. I am kinda burnt out on them now. If I do this again next year, I'm gonna have to watch more actually good movies, and you can recommend those to me, because my question of the day will be, what are some of your favorite Halloween or spooky or horror movies? I know that's the same question of the day I had in my Scream video, but also I don't care because no one watched that video and no one's gonna watch this one either. If you're watching all the way to the end in this video, comment below your favorite egg recipe, I guess. That way I'll know that you're a true fan and watched all the way through this video even though you don't care about horror movies. Anyway, yeah, that's the video. I talked way too long in this one, so until next time, I'll see you next time.